Triambakam yajamahe Sugantim pushtivardhanam Purvarukamiva bandhanam Mrityurmukshyamamritat
Hi, this is Amelía And Satya.
Hey everyone, it's Satya, and you're listening to Love, Sex, and the Hidden Agenda.
So in our last episode, we were talking about how porn is a virus. Well, we were talking about so many amazing things, but at the very end, and I wanted to keep talking, but we had to stop. But you mentioned about porn spreading through our psyches like a virus. And that is fascinating to me. And I feel like people really need to know like what you're really talking about. I don't think like people really understood the depths of what that was. And I even need to hear it again. I've heard it before and I was completely blown away, but I wanted to go into that because I want to go deeper into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's important to explain like how I see and where this information comes from and why I just say something like that so flippantly.
Yeah.
It's not from some sort of, I don't know, somebody might think like, oh, that's a religious standpoint, but no, when it's not the case at all. In fact, in my 20s, I was very sexually active and expressed and felt very liberated sexually and explored a lot of my sort of shadow nature. And then when I was 30, my father passed away as well as my spiritual teacher. And actually that year there were 9 deaths in my family or my inner circle. And so an extraordinary experience happened to me where my Kundalini awakened, and I didn't know what a Kundalini awakening was at the time, but I was dating an Indian guy who comes from a long lineage of like the tantric path. Basically, after my dad passed away, some interesting phenomena started happening to me where during sex, I was opening to other ways of seeing. So, this guy that I was dating, he liked to only be sexual with like the lights turned off and in pitch black. And
was he like a tantric master or something like that? Like,
well, he's from a lineage of tantric Hinduism, like the Brahmin caste. For those of you who understand, that's like his bloodline. He himself, his father wasn't a priest. His father was like the first one in the lineage to like go into the armed forces, and then he was sort of pushed in that way. But he did a lot of self-study of ancient texts, and it's really passed down through the bloodlines, a lot of it. But he had a lot of, self-knowledge as well as book knowledge of Kundalini and tantric practices. But it wasn't this kind of neo-tantric stuff that we learn in the West. It's from a deeper
sounds like the real thing. Yeah,
it was more like the real thing. And I was really looking for someone who could explain to me more sacred sexuality because of the path that I was on in my 20s and just exploring sexuality and wanting more from my sex life. But what happened with him was really extraordinary because it was a kind of orgasm and experiences that I had never had before. And I thought I was quite, sexually explored at that point. But yeah, in one of our sort of experiences, you know, I don't even think we were having sex, but we were just kind of in an intimate space. It was dark. It was sexual in nature. But I started to see like through time and space. So I was reaching sort of an orgasmic state, but what was happening was I was opening to a different vision. And it's hard to explain, so I'm going to try and do the best I can. But basically, like the sky opened up, and instead of seeing a dark room, I was seeing all the different. I was living in an apartment complex in San Francisco, and I could see all the different units in my apartment building and on what floor. And somehow I started connecting and feeling that there were people having sex in certain units simultaneously. Like I just immediately could see, it was like a movie got turned on. And then I was so tripped out by that I kept expanding my vision, and it felt like I could just move further and further above the building to like the whole block, and then to like the whole city. And I was tapping into like everyone who was simultaneously like in an orgasmic state or having a sexual experience. And it was so trippy. Yeah. It was really like a sci-fi movie or something, you know. The vision was really wild. And then I was thinking, well, how am I able to see all this, and what's happening here? And when I zoomed out even further, I saw this parasitic looking creature that had tentacles that was like siphoning off all of these sexual experiences. Like it was basically, the way I would describe it is, it was in an astral realm experience where there's another entity living that had cast a kind of shadow net, kind of like a spider web with tentacles, that was siphoning off the energy of our sexual natures. Does that make sense?
Oh my goodness.
I know, it's really gross, but that's what I saw. That's why I call it a parasite.
Wow. So what do you, I feel like everyone needs a minute.
I do. I'm like all shaky because it's so scary. I don't know, like revisiting it and looking at it again, it's like really activates me.
So you were just blown open, and you could just suddenly see and feel all these things. I mean, that's like, you know, we all have like some kind of ability. You know, if you're walking past somebody and you feel, oh, I feel like that person over there is, you know, sad today, or just got some bad news, or that person seems really alive or happy, or it's like that, but just a whole other dimension.
Yeah, well, I think what you're talking about is more empathic. No, this was vampiric, dark energy that was basically taking people's so it was perverting the pureness of the sexuality. So it was kind of a frightening experience for me, because it was distorting people's sexual desires to be like darker and more hungry. It was like a hungry ghost, or like I just always see it like vampiric, but it was more parasitic. Like, you know, a vampire would just like take a prey and suck the blood out. It wasn't doing it like that. It was like a sneaky way. It was planting itself inside people's psyche, so that as they were having sex, it was then feeding them these dark images. And a lot of it was connected to porn, because I kept pulling back the veil, and I kept following where, like following the tentacles back and back and back. It's so intense. It's like so activating in my body right now.
So was that the first time that you'd seen it?
That was the first time I saw it. And flipped me out so much that I very quickly realized I could not have sex anymore. And I realized that I needed to purify my body and my womb and my like sexual energy because I could see that this parasite lived inside me also. And it was what was kind of feeding off this sort of darker nature of my sexuality. And it jarred me so much that I ended up going from a very sexually liberated and expressed person to totally abstinent for what ended up being 5 years. But I thought at the time that it was just going to be like a 9 months cleansing kind of a thing. But I kept seeing, that was just the first time I saw it, but I continue to see it to this day. I track it and I see it.
I mean, that would be enough. Yeah. I mean, that would be enough to make anyone
ruin your sex life.
Like,
totally ruined my sex life.
Oh gosh. I mean, that would be so shocking. It's here's all these innocent human beings, like trying to do something that's supposed to be, loving or sacred. And then something like that is going on. And then
feeding
it explains
off
a lot.
And perverting it is what it was like so the parasite itself, once you engage it, it's kind of it controls us. And I started to see that it's like hooked into like everybody. Like I couldn't see people that weren't connected to it. And that was the bigger disturbance. Was just finding someone or looking for someone that didn't have that hookup.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you think about all of the images, even that we're exposed to just on billboards, and there's always something kind of dark, it seems to me, sexually, or women in precarious positions or with certain looks on their face, or and it seems like, let's say, even if you're not watching porn, although porn's a direct route into that, I'm sure, but there's something there. And I wonder if people, I want to know, how many people out there have had, fantasies or things that they think are probably not okay, or that they wouldn't just, assume everyone else is having, or they wouldn't just tell their friend.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the immediate, I want to call tweaks or distortions that happened right after that for me sexually. So it wasn't like immediately after that I decided to be abstinent. I kept trying to be sexual, but what was happening every time I was sexual, was that I would have these weird, it felt like a past life memory. So, I was with my Indian boyfriend at the time. And I would have this whole on experience of him as my uncle, and I was a niece. And it was like a role play out, but I wouldn't necessarily tell him what I was seeing in my head. I was just going along with it, but somehow the way he was behaving, there was sort of a telepathic communication, as if he could see what I was seeing. And then it was the minute we would have sex, I would then end up crying and feeling really disturbed and shameful. And then he would kind of snap out of, the trance that we were in, and he'd be like, "What's going on? Why are you crying?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I just, you were my uncle." And then, I was trying to figure out wait a second, did you see what I saw? Do you remember this? And then he was he's a spiritual guy and does a lot of meditation, and was curious as to what my experience was. But honestly, what happened was that I started thinking, oh my God, he molested someone, or he's done this lives in him. And I'm just like tapping into it. And why? And then it was like, well, no, I was the one seeing that, and what's wrong with me? And so then this whole like weird pointing fingers, like whose problem is this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause that would be the natural, something like that happens. You're thinking, am I tapping into this person and it's theirs or their issue? And am I getting information about them? Or is this about me? Is this something I've repressed or something? Or where did I get this? Where did this come from?
Yeah. And the first couple of times it happened, it was like, okay, this is our past life experience. That's what I kind of summed it up as, is like, we were the niece and an uncle in a past life. Because in the visions, I was Indian. We were both Indian. That was what was so weird to me. And I was like, okay, like, is this his Indian niece? And then of course he didn't take it very lightly when I sort of accused him of molesting a niece. His nieces at the time were very young, and he was like, how could you say? I mean, he was very, very disturbed that I would even have that thought of him, which now I get. But at the time, I was just trying to figure it out. Like, what is wrong with me? And
you
then
must have been freaking out. I mean,
I was freaking out. It really sucked. It really ruined my pleasure.
Oh gosh.
Around my sexuality, that's for sure. And as it continued, I mean, it basically every time we tried to be sexual, I would end up shaking, like terrified, crying.
Oh gosh.
And then I realized, okay, well, I've been a therapist long enough and studied psychology long enough to know that if a client, I would say, you've been sexually abused and this is hidden memory coming out. But at the time, I had no memory of being abused. So I started seeing other therapists and trying to like dig inside my own psyche, like, have I been abused? Like, where is this coming from? And why am I, freaking out? Here it is. My dad died and all these other people in my life passed away that same year. And I'm now in this kind of trauma around my sexuality. Yeah.
I mean, and for those listeners who may or may not believe in past lives, I mean, it doesn't really matter, because either way, you don't know where it was coming from. It could have been something from this life, or you could have been, but this is, I'm tripping out that you're saying this, because this is a thing. This is actually a thing. And I keep hearing about it from people, and this is so not talked about. This is such a huge secret. And people don't talk about this, but if you talk to, anyone who's a sex therapist or, who knows these things, the whole niece uncle fantasy thing is pretty, I don't know if I want to say common, but I want to say a lot more common than people would think. And, people, it's scary. So here we go. This is why the light needs to be shed on this, because it's scary, because people are not knowing this, and stuff is going on, in families and stuff. An uncle is usually a safe person, a trusted person, maybe the only male that sometimes a niece is around. And just on another note, I'm not talking exactly about the energetics that you're talking about, but on a real physical, plane here, these things happen in families pretty often, and
more often than talked about. That's for sure.
Yeah. And maybe in another episode or something, we'll have to go, more into that. And because that's.
Well, what's really fascinating? So about 2 years after I had that experience, I moved to India with that same partner who became my husband. And our first cleaning lady, who was 19 years old, so she's like the first Indian girlfriend. I mean, I guess I call her friend because she was my first kind of, villager that I got to know living in the country. Well, here she was 19. She had 2 kids. One was 6 years old. She's 19. And her other child was like 1 year old. And her husband was 26 years old and was her uncle, her mother's brother.
Oh. And
when I heard that she had her first kid at 12?
Oh, wow.
She was 12 when she got married, and she had her first kid at 13. That just tripped me out. And then the fact that she's married to her uncle, and I was like, well, is that normal? Is that okay? Why are you married to your uncle? And she said, oh, well, my dad died. And so they made me marry my uncle because who else is going to take care of me? And that was just completely normal for her. I mean, for that village. I mean, that wasn't weird for anybody.
I see.
Except me.
Okay, of course, yeah.
Right? And I'm sitting there going does anyone else find this weird? Because this is creepy. What?
Oh my goodness.
But no, it was just that's...
Yeah, that would never fly here in the West.
Right. And then it becomes well, why doesn't it fly here? And why is it okay in some cultures and not? And so then it made me look back on that memory of a past life. Now here's the weird thing about that whole memory. When I was feeling like his niece in these sexual encounters, is that I loved him deeply. The love I had for him was so immense and pure. And then somehow the sexual act felt really dirty and impure and like a distortion of the love.
Right.
And that's what stuck with me. And what I found with this, parasite, we started talking about the parasite.
Yeah.
Is that's the part that felt unpure and shameful is the parasite. So when the parasite's not there, the pureness, the innocence, and it doesn't go to those dark places. It has its own expression of freedom and bliss that doesn't have shame involved. And that's what I'm trying to get back to in my own life. And this all happened in 2003. So, I've been doing this for a number of years, trying to clear the hooks of that parasite that are in me from my personal abuse stories, which, later I learned over a course of many years that I had been molested and I had a lot of hidden memory come up. But not only remove it in me, but then find a partner that isn't feeding that parasite and is able to disengage it. I have not yet experienced that. I've met people who've come close, but basically I feel that we're all sort of infected. But I do think that there's a possibility and a way to dislodge this. It needs a lot of consciousness, a lot of love and care. And I don't know if anyone else can see it the way I see it, but I can literally see it inside of people and in the astral realm. I see it very clearly.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, and I don't think, in no way are we saying, because I'm just realizing that somebody out there might be thinking wait, are they saying that without the parasite, or without the the negative thought forms that it would be okay in some way for an uncle and a niece to be together, or for like this kind of fantasy to occur. That's not what we're saying.
No, I think that the reason why we have that fantasy is because of that parasite, because of the way it plants images. It distorts and perverts our pure life force into this kind of perverted desire so that it can control us. Because if we have that shame, we talked about the toxic shame in the first episode, that if we are harboring shame, then that parasite can control us.
I see.
It actually moves through shame. And that's why I believe, like anyone being abused and the whole secret thing or keeping secrets, it breeds in the secrets and the shame. And that's why I want to talk about it, because I've seen that so clearly. It's like, well, what if we just expose it? If everybody starts to see it and notice it and didn't feel ashamed to just expose where it's hiding, well, I feel like maybe we have an opportunity to eradicate it.
Right. Because let's take a 17-year-old or 18-year-old niece who, is maybe going through a hard time, or maybe doesn't have a father, or, and is in her sexuality is rising at that age, and she's discovering, and she doesn't really, there's not enough talk about this for people coming into their sexuality either, about how sacred it is, or how to manage it, right? How to circulate it, what it is, what you're feeling. There can be a lot of confusion, and
there's a ton of confusion. Yeah.
Yeah. And then let's say there's an uncle who also has some confusion or some problems there. And then these two are spending a lot of time together, and the rest of the family thinks, oh, they're just chatting, or, well, they really get along, or they're really, they're really close. They really get each other. And then suddenly there's sexual feelings going on from him to her, and he's feeling maybe something from her, or maybe he starts something, and then she feels then roped in, maybe, or starts to.
Oh, for sure. Because the purity of like an innocent, someone who's in their innocence of their sexuality, they are going to be so pure in the expression of their attraction. And what happens for someone who already has that hook inside them is that when they receive the attraction of another, like if it's the uncle receiving the adoration and the unconditional love of a niece, which is really common. I mean, that is just what happens, right? There's just this young, beautiful girl child who is completely adoring this man. Well, if that man doesn't see it in the purest light, or is then fantasizing about that, and that hook and that parasite is in him, he's going to have a hard time finding his boundaries with it, and being able to really transmute that to a high level. I mean, I've been searching all over the world looking for men who can handle that kind of female pure Shakti energy, and very few. I mean, I can say maybe I've only met one or two men that can really sit in the presence of that sort of pure Shakti energy and not take it to their erection and to their need to get off on it.
Yeah, thank you for being blunt about that, because that's the case right there.
And it's such a shame, because if we can't find our purity and innocence, well, then like everything just goes so corrupt, and that's where the toxic shame. And so if the uncle sees that and then gets aroused and then can't help himself and is just sort of playing with the line and trying to figure it out, and then maybe the niece starts talking to him about sex because she feels his arousal, and so she's going to keep egging it on because she's getting this attention. Like, it just goes back and forth. And so where do you put, I don't know, the morality clause or the blame or the, it gets really blurry and confusing for both parties. We don't have pure role models of clean sexuality in the world today. I have been looking. I haven't seen them. If anyone listening knows of them, please share them with me and the other listeners, because it's just so rare. Like, what, you've got pop stars, you've got, priests that are abusing the kids in the church. I mean, that's what was happening in my church. Like, where do you find clean role models of clear and expressed sexuality?
Exactly. And it really blows my mind that in this time, we think that we're so evolved. We think that, we're talking about things now. And yes, we are. But there's so much still, so far to go. And that this is our most powerful, one of our most powerful forces in the world is the sexual energy. So how do we educate people about this and how they might be feeling in certain different situations and at certain ages, and because the fact is that this is just going on. It's rampant. It happens all the time. And yet nobody seems to know anything about it, or people aren't educating. And so this leaves people to trying to figure it out for themselves, or trying to, and then along comes you who is seeing this whole thing. I mean, this is almost like two different topics. But seeing this parasite thing, this thing infecting us on this energetic level, that's a huge wake-up call.
Yeah, and we need to talk about that maybe separately, because that's an interdimensional, like, where did this thing come from? But just to wrap up, like, I don't think there is education about what I'm talking about, and that's where we're all sort of
lost.
Yeah, lost and confused and grappling with, well, what does it look like? Where do I go this way? Do I go that way? And I know for myself, I had to swing from like really sexually expressed and liberated to completely living like a saint and a nun. And then now trying to like really find the middle path, find that path where I'm not shutting down my sexuality or negating it, but honoring it and purifying it to the highest frequency that I believe it can shine at. So like reclaiming our innocence and purity, and reestablishing love as the primary life force, not shame, not letting fear run. Yeah. So I think this is the discussion, and this is a like community learning. Yeah. This has been my exploration and sort of my life's work of just wanting to find that satisfaction for myself. And so, going down all these routes looking for answers, but I don't know anyone who holds all the answers. So hopefully we'll discover some things, uncover things, put the pieces together and map out and start exploring something new.
Yeah. We're going to figure it out.
Is there hope? Is there hope for us? Yeah, well, let's continue this conversation in the next episode.
All right. See you guys next time.
Thanks Thanks for hanging out with us. If you'd like to contact us and stay in touch with us, you can find us at lovesexagenda.com. That's lovesexagenda.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram, Love, Sex, and the Hidden Agenda.
Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi